Welcome, everybody. This is Igor. I am here with Dr. Stephan Guyenet. He is the author of a fantastic book called The Hungry Brain. Stephan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Igor.
Thanks for being here. I read The Hungry Brain, like I said, back in 2017, 2018. And I'd love to know what got you interested in this whole field of, I guess, the neuroscience of obesity.
Yeah, so I've always been interested in fitness and body fatness, always played sports and just kind of had a general interest in nutrition. I guess I've always just wanted to, try to perform and look as good as I can. And I think that I also had a very strong interest in science from a young age, and I ended up taking that in the direction of biochemistry for undergrad with the idea that I would ultimately go into neuroscience, which was really my big interest. Because neuroscience is, the brain is the organ that makes us who we are more than any other organ, and it's also one of the greatest remaining scientific frontiers. And so that was a big interest for me. And so I went into neuroscience for grad school at the University of Washington. And at that time, my big interest was neurodegenerative disease. So I wanted to understand why the brain starts to break down in some people and if there's anything we can do about it. So I ended up studying neurodegenerative disease, but I was working on a disease that was quite rare. And I eventually just wanted to branch out into something that was more impactful. And over the years, in my latter years in graduate school, I had been writing more about health and nutrition and body weight. And I came to learn that the brain actually plays a really central role in body weight regulation. And so it was a very natural step for me to move into the neuroscience of obesity, which is what I did for my postdoc, also at the University of Washington in the lab of Mike Schwartz. And so I mean, body fatness is regulated by the brain. Many of the things that plug into body fatness are regulated by the brain, like our appetite and our food cravings and our energy expenditure, our physical activity. All of those things are generated or regulated by the brain. And in addition to that, there's an actual regulatory system in the brain that actually regulates your body fat level, kind of like your brain regulates your body temperature level to try to keep it in a certain zone. And so it was a very natural combination for me based on my interests and skills to move into obesity research. And that also allowed me to work on something that is incredibly impactful instead of something where the impact I felt was more limited in terms of studying a rare neurodegenerative disease. So so that's what got me interested in the area. And essentially my public communication efforts around there were stimulated by, first of all, there was so much information in that field that I felt was very informative and enlightening about how body fatness works. And it wasn't really getting to the public. And also because it wasn't getting to the public, there was this proliferation of harebrained theories about how it works. And so all of that together, that was kind of the perfect storm for me to write a book about it, which ended up being The Hungry Brain.
Yeah, and I'm glad you did. Fantastic book. One of the things that you just mentioned is that the brain is one of the regulators of energy expenditure. As I guess the general public would understand it, is if our energy expenditure or calories burned goes down, then we get less hungry, so that we don't so that we're in energy balance. If energy expenditure goes up, we get more hungry to compensate for that. Would that be accurate?
Yes, it is accurate. And I don't want to say that the regulatory system is perfect because, people's weight does change over
Yes.
time. If it was perfect, our weight would never change.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say the regulatory system never changes, or sorry, I don't want to say the regulatory system is perfect, but it does compensate. Yes. So, a good example of that is if you do a day of very vigorous physical activity, you're probably going to feel hungry at the end of that day. You're going to work up an appetite. And that is an example of the systems in your body detecting that energy is leaving faster than it's coming in and trying to correct that situation by bringing more energy in. So that's like an example that we're all familiar with from our lives. But actually, there is a long-term process as well, in addition to that shorter-term process. And that is one that we're not as aware of. It's completely beyond our conscious awareness. It operates slowly over long time scales. But essentially it tweaks your appetite and your metabolic rate in order to try to maintain the stability of your body fat stores over longer periods of time. And so, one of the big questions is why, if we have this regulatory system, why do people often typically gain weight over the course of the years? And essentially what we think is happening is that the regulatory system is actually re-regulating to a higher weight. So it's not just, your weight's not just passively floating around, your regulated weight is actually increasing, kind of like if you were to turn the temperature up on your thermostat.
Right. So what's interesting is that some people can start exercising, they burn a lot of calories, and yet their appetite doesn't go up. Other people burn 200, 300 calories with exercise, and their appetite goes up by 400 or 500 calories. Life is cruel. So why the discrepancy between the two kinds of people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think that we have a complete or confident answer that we can give to this question. People either undercompensate or overcompensate to physical activity. And I think a good hypothesis to explain that is that physical activity itself actually affects the set point, your body weight set point. In other words, the weight that your brain is trying to defend against changes. So for some people, if they exercise, their set point will actually drop, which means that not only will the brain accept the higher amount of energy leaving through physical activity, and not only will it not compensate by making you eat more, it might actually reduce your calorie intake. But in some people, it doesn't work like that. Your brain is like, nope, we're gonna eat even more. And why that happens, why that's not consistent between individuals, I don't know. There's actually a lot of controversy about the relationship between physical activity and total metabolic rate. In other words, how many calories your body expends over a 24-hour period and how that affects your body weight. There's a lot of controversy around that right now. Some of that controversy has actually emerged since I published my book, as a result of work from Herman Poncer predominantly. If you're interested, we could talk about that, or we can leave it there.
Sure. No, that's a very interesting topic. Let's go into it. What does the evidence say?
Yeah. So what Herman Poncer is arguing, and this guy, he's a researcher. He's a very credible person. So that's the context here. What he is arguing is basically that your body adapts. If you exercise a lot, your body adapts to that extra expenditure of calories and cuts back on calorie expenditure from other places. And so your overall total metabolic rate doesn't change over long periods of time. So in other words, if you habitually get a lot of exercise, up to a point, if you habitually get a lot of exercise, you actually will not be burning more calories in a day than a person who only gets a modest amount of exercise each day, assuming those two people have the same size body and the same sex. So this is very counterintuitive because, of course, we know that exercise burns calories. Obviously, it does. But what he is saying is that this total amount of energy that we expend is also a regulated quantity. And so you burn more from exercise, your body's going to cut back on other things to maintain the the same total level. I'm not an expert in this area, so I can't make judgments on it with great confidence, but it is an area of interest for me, and it's something that I've corresponded with Herman about, and also some other scientists who are in this area. And my take is there's probably some truth to what he's saying, but it's not quite as black and white as what he's saying. So if you look at studies that have given that have prescribed people large increases in exercise to where they're burning like 500 extra calories a day, and that's actually being monitored and enforced by researchers. So like,
Right.
they're not just sending people home and saying, hey, go jogging, because people don't do that. They're actually bringing
Not
people in.
self-report.
Yeah, they're actually bringing people into a research facility and observing them on the treadmill or whatever to make sure that they're actually doing it. If you look at
Right.
that kind of study, what you find is there actually does seem to be a long-term increase in energy expenditure, and it's dose dependent with the exercise. So the more exercise you do, the higher your energy expenditure. But there's a catch, and that's that the increase is only about half as big as you would predict. And so, yeah, and so it seems like there's some truth to what he's saying, because how could you? I mean, literally, these people are sitting there on an exercise bike or whatever, and they're burning 500 calories. You know that they burned 500 calories in that session, and yet their overall daily calorie expenditure is not going up by 500. It's going up by 200 or 300. And
So the
so,
body's bring back elsewhere.
yeah, that's right. And it doesn't seem to be like they become couch potatoes in the rest of their lives. It seems to be really coming out of more of your basal metabolic rate, all of those metabolic activities that your body does at rest. And so, which is an interesting idea. And that sounds bad, but it's actually probably a good thing. It's probably closer to how we evolved. And maybe that extra metabolic activity that physically inactive people have could be contributing to all kinds of bad things like high blood pressure and anxiety and autoimmune disease, because you're just like pushing extra energy into all your body's systems. So that's the idea. And I think it's an interesting one and a good one, but I think we still have a fair amount of uncertainty around it.
Yeah, still a lot of questions to well, in great part to identify individual differences and the reasons behind them. Very interesting. Now, in the Hungry Brain, you talk about reducing food cues. And I often tell that to my clients. I'm a personal trainer, so I'll often talk about this. But one of the biggest complaints I get from my clients is that's fine for me, but my husband, my wife, my kids, they like the potato chips, the chocolate, etc. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's rough. I mean, I totally get that. I have a young child, so the foods that you might want that child to be eating aren't necessarily the foods that you want to be eating, or
Right.
the foods that your partner wants to eat. They might not have the same goals as you or the same needs as you in terms of fitness and health. And it's tough. I mean, I think, off the top of my head, I think asking them for support is one thing you can do, like explain to them what you're trying to do and ask them to help you do it. And I think, most people who care about someone else will be willing to make some kind of sacrifice or compromise to help them achieve an important goal that they have. So I think if you come to it with that attitude, it might be helpful. Like, you're not having necessarily just like saying, I want this gone and having a fight, but asking them for help
Right.
in you achieving your goals. And I think that that's one thing. And then there's other things that are smaller, like maybe you could have a compromise, like maybe this food is here sometimes, but not all the time. Or maybe instead of being on the counter, we can put it in the cabinet, or we can put it in a glass jar with a screw top. So there's an effort barrier associated with it. So creating effort barriers and getting the visual cues out of the way so you're not constantly being tempted like that. Those are just some ideas off the top of my head.
Yeah, I often use the same ones. I often tell the same ones to my clients. One other one that I'll often tell my clients is this. If there's a food that your whatever spouse or child likes, but you don't, for example, you might not like licorice sticks, but they do, get that, because that you're not going to be tempted by that. So that's another one that I often use. And funny that you talk about food cues. Have you heard Google actually use that exact strategy with their employees to, well, first gain weight without, well, not on purpose, and then lose weight? Have you heard about that?
No, I'm not familiar.
So when Google was first starting up and they had a bunch of like staff in an office, they wanted to be it to be a really great workplace. So what they did is that they wanted that no employee should ever be more than 30 either feet or meters more than that away from delicious food, which is delicious. Unfortunately, is not always healthy. Chocolate bars, pop, etc. And of course, they had a great workplace, but they also gained weight. As they gained weight, their productivity decreased and they started eating more. And what they were thinking was that it was clear, etc. So they tried to do the opposite. What if we did the opposite? What if rather than having all these food cues available, we had healthy food cues? We took the chocolate bars and instead of putting it inside a see-through glass, we made it opaque. What if we put the pop inside covers instead of out of plain sight? And what if we put vegetables in plain sight? What if we put water that looked attractive, like with cucumbers and lemons and ice in it, and that was in plain sight? And sure enough, Google employees, I think, lost somewhere between 15 and 30 pounds without really trying. So I think they borrowed your ideas.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, one thing I always tell my clients and my readers is that the undebatable key to fat loss is being in a caloric deficit, but it can't feel like you're in a caloric deficit. You can't feel hungry. So can you speak to that a little bit? Because we all know that we need to reduce our calories, but how do we do it in a way that we don't think that this is going to end one day and we're going to go off the diet?
Yeah, I think we have to address the reason for the hunger, and the reason for the hunger is the brain. So the brain perceives that the body is in an energy deficit and it causes you to feel additional hunger. And so essentially, this is the result of these non-conscious brain circuits that are survival circuits that evolved to keep our distant ancestors alive, but that we unfortunately have inherited and that don't play that great in the modern world. So there's this collection of circuits that regulate your body energy status, and having a little bit of understanding of how to impact those circuits, I think, is helpful in getting around that hunger that people experience. And by the way, I just want to make sure to set people's expectations. Like, I'm not one of those people who's going to say, like, I have the secret to magic, effortless loss of all your excess fat. That
Right.
is unrealistic for most people. And, I don't like to mislead people. But I think there are more successful paths that can lead more people to more weight loss, and more weight loss that is more sustainable. And then there are less successful paths. And so I try to help people find the more successful paths, even though it's not going to take every person who has obesity and, make it so that they are lean. They might still have success in losing enough weight to get the benefits that they're looking for. And so there are different ways to address it. I think, one of the brain circuits that really trips us up is our reward system that perceives cues in our environment and triggers the drive to eat. And so I think it's really important to control your food environment and not feed your brain those cues that get your dopamine spiking, that get your motivation spiking, that give you this kind of like drive to eat, even if you don't need to eat. So just because you want to eat, or because it's there, it's convenient, you're bored, whatever, that kind of eating can be addressed by controlling your food environment. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is you change the composition of the food that you eat. So there are circuits in your brainstem that regulate your satiation and satiety, which is the feeling of fullness that you experience on a meal to meal level. So as you're eating, you build up this feeling of fullness, and eventually that results in you losing interest in food. Well, there's a brain process that underlies that. There are brain circuits and brain activity that cause that feeling to accrue, and you can emphasize that more with certain types of foods. And so foods that are lower in calorie density, so more water and fiber, less fat and carbohydrate. So think about, for example, a bowl of oatmeal versus a handful of crackers. They might contain the same amount of calories, but there's a lot more volume in the bowl of oatmeal. You're going to feel more full for the same number of calories with the oatmeal.
Right.
And so, so that's one variable. Higher protein also makes you feel more full per unit calorie. Lower palatability. So foods that taste really good actually make us eat more. We require more of those foods to get to that point of fullness. So even though you might feel stuffed after eating a big pizza, you probably ate twice as many calories as you would have need to feel full on a piece of chicken and brown rice and broccoli.
Yeah, I often say, how often is it that you hear stories about somebody sitting down with the intention to eat two cookies, but they have 10? Very often. But how often is it that you see somebody sit down with the intention to eat one apple and accidentally they had three? You don't really hear that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And that's and if you think about it in terms of calories ingested, the difference is even more stark because
Yeah,
apples
exactly.
are not that calorie dense relative to cookies. So yeah, so that, there's a combination of things going on there. Cookies have higher palatability, so they're more tempting. They have higher calorie density, so it's easier to eat more, and you can eat more before feeling full. So so yeah, that's a good example. Another example is dessert. Like, we don't eat dessert because we're still hungry. Usually we eat dessert because we're looking for a sweet treat. We're looking for that dopamine hit. We're not actually physiologically needing additional energy. And
Yeah.
so that's an example of reward driven eating that can increase our calorie intake and also just, degrade diet quality. So those are a couple of things that you can do. And protein, I think, among the macronutrients, I think protein is particularly important because it hits this from a couple of different angles. Protein, like I said, it increases satiety, so it kind of triggers that signaling in your brainstem that makes you feel more full. But it also hits these kind of longer term weight regulating circuits in your hypothalamus that are more involved in more directly regulating your body fat level. So it helps your body feel more comfortable at a slimmer level. Yeah, and it helps your body feel more comfortable at a slimmer level. And the reason we know that is because if you look at studies where people eat high protein weight loss diets, they don't experience as much of this starvation response
Right.
effect as people who eat lower protein diets. So they don't have as much of a hunger response over long periods of time. They don't have as much of a decline in metabolic rate, suggesting that the body is trying to conserve energy. Um, and they don't have as much of a reduction in lean mass. So essentially, it seems to help appease the brain and make the brain more comfortable with weight loss, so it's not fighting you as much when you eat more protein. So those are just a few ideas.
Awesome. And yeah, I often say the same thing. In regards to the extra appetite for dessert, it's the buffet effect. You finish eating all the goodies at the buffet, you feel stuffed. You haven't eaten dessert yet, and yet even though you feel like you're 9 months pregnant with triplets, you can still go for some dessert. And that's again, like you said, it's not because of hunger; it's because of just reward. You just, I mean, you just want the dopamine hit. Um, so yeah, great point. Now, what would you say to people who, for example, that they acknowledge physiologically, yes, protein is a great macronutrient to eat. You need a certain amount of it, but what if they just don't have the appetite, or they just don't like the taste of different protein of high protein foods? Is there a way to kind of train them to like that, or just force themselves, or something else?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Um, this isn't something that I've thought about a lot, but a couple of things that come to mind. First of all, you could try something like whey protein. Whey protein can be pretty tasty, and it's a lot of protein in a very small package that you can drink down really quick. Um, Maybe that would be helpful, just off the top of my head. Another thing to mention, though, is that protein is a powerful tool, but it's not the only tool in your toolbox. And
Right.
so there are other things you can do, like you can work more on the lower calorie density side, you can work more on the food environment side, you can work more on how often you're going out or how you're ordering when you go out. Um, those types of things. You can work more on the physical activity and the sleep and the stress management. So yeah, so there are other tools in the toolbox. And if you really don't want to mess with protein, there are other things you can do. You are leaving a tool on the table, but maybe that's okay. I mean, I don't think everybody necessarily needs to use every tool to achieve their goals.
Right. And that's actually a great message to hear, because a lot of diet gurus will say, my way is the only way. This is the only diet that works. No other diet will work. Whereas what you're saying is that, hey, this is just a tool in the toolbox. You don't have to use it. There's a million ways to get the job done. So it's encouraging that, hey, if one tool doesn't appeal, well, you have a handful of other tools that you can use. So very encouraging. That's fantastic. Last question is about priorities. A number of my clients, personal training clients, that they'll often say, I recognize that health and fitness needs to be a priority. I want it to be a priority. But for some reason, when other things come up, whether it's work or family, or even just very small, mundane things like, doing the laundry, cleaning up, they take priority over something that I know needs to be a higher priority, my health. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, I mean, I would say first of all, you are totally normal. And that is normal and it's nothing to be ashamed of. And so, a couple of things is we have very different intrinsic motivations for different behaviors. So, imagine that you find yourself in front of, well, okay, let's say you want to go for a jog. Most people have to motivate themselves to get out the door and do the jog, right? Like they have to give themselves a push. Maybe it's a big push, maybe it's a little push, but there is some effort, some mental effort involved in getting yourself out of the door, getting yourself running, right? But and so it's like your brain is kind of resisting it and you have to overcome that resistance. But now imagine that you're sitting in front of a table and there is a delicious food in front of you. Let's say, we're talking about pizza, or I know you're Canada,
Yeah.
poutine,
Yeah.
or ice cream. Now it's reversed. Your intrinsic motivation is to consume that food, to engage in the behavior, and you have to exert effort to not eat the food, right? So we are hardwired with these intrinsic motivations to want to seek highly rewarding foods and to not want to unnecessarily exert energy. That's how most people are wired. There's variation, everybody's a little different, but that is typically how we are wired. That's how I'm wired. And so that's normal for it to be harder for us to do things like exercise than for us to indulge in delicious foods. Um, and then so that's the motivational side of it. And then there's the practical side of it, which is just like finding time, or even finding energy because you had a hard day at work, or, you got kids to take care of and all that. And I sympathize with that as well. And, one of the things that I think probably the single best advice I can give is to try to build physical activity into the fabric of your day. So, and I think the best way to do that personally, if you're able to do that, is to do active commuting. So, not everyone might have the ability to do this, but if you have the ability to bike to work, if you have the ability to walk to work, or, you could do walking meetings. If you're having meetings, just walk around your neighborhood with your earbuds in. Um, another thing, some people would say, well, my commute is way too far. Well, can you drive halfway and then bike halfway and then just bike back to your car and drive the rest of the way home? Is there some way for you to build it in organically into your day? Because once it's part of your habit, once it's something that you do every day, because that's just what you have to do, then you don't really think about it. And there's not that motivational barrier anymore. It's just something that you do habitually. And having that, I work from home now, but I really miss having that bike commute. I bike commuted for, I don't know, 15 years, and it wasn't very far. It was like 3 miles each way, but it was perfect. Every day I had that 20-minute ride in the morning and then in the evening. So every day I was getting solid exercise, going up and down hills. And I think that's, if you can, I think that's a really good way to do it. The other thing I would say is there's a lot of little things people can do as part of their day. So you can, people often take the elevator by default. Can you take the stairs by default? Some people are in a situation where they might be in a building with a number of floors they have to go up and down every day. Can you take the stairs? Can you take little breaks from your computer and do body weight squats? Can you, on weekends, can you shift your leisure activities toward more physically active things, like going for walks with your family or bike rides or paddling or whatever it is that you enjoy? So those are just some ideas. Yeah, but I recognize that it's difficult, but I think, if I think most people can find a way to build more physical activity into their lives.
Yeah, yeah. And I often say in my articles and in my podcasts is that a 5 minute workout is better than a 0 minute workout. But also, one of the most important things to your success in that is your social circle. How much does your social circle like participating in physical activity? So I'll tell people, choose one of two things: choose an activity or choose a person. Choose an activity that you know you like doing, or that you don't know you like doing but you'd like to try. Or if there's nothing that comes to mind, if you just hate moving your body, think of a person you want to spend more time with, whether that's your spouse, a friend, sibling, parent, whatever. Um, and then pick some kind of physical activity, whether it's a walk or hike, a bike ride, a game of tennis or whatever, and do that. So either pick an activity or pick a person, and then try to do something. Ideally on a regular basis. If you're doing 0, try 1 time a week. If you're doing once, try twice. So yeah, that's a great message. Find easy, simple ways to fit into your day. And we don't need to have this all or none mentality that I'm going to go to the gym and exercise only happens in the gym and it has to be an hour. It could be 5 minutes, which is better than 0. So fantastic message. I know that was my last question. I just thought of another one. Is there anything that I'm not asking that you think I should be asking?
Anything that you haven't asked that I think you should have asked? Well, if I think, I know that you're probably more focused on like diet and lifestyle stuff, but there are many ways to manage body weight. And one of the things that I have been writing an article about recently and that I'm excited about are some of the new weight loss medications that
Oh,
are becoming available now.
right.
So there is semaglutide is one that actually in Canada has been used off label now for a couple of years for weight loss, and it's really effective. It's I spoke with David Macklin, who's at Toronto, and he was telling me that he's seeing 18 to 20% weight loss in his patients,
Wow.
like 18 to 20% loss of body weight in his patients, which is not that much less than you get with bariatric surgery. And
Yeah, impressive.
yeah, as far as we know, uh, the side effect profile is really quite good. There's kind of a hump in the beginning where some people can feel nauseous and have other GI symptoms, but most people it's fairly mild and they get over all that, and they just people tend to have really good experiences with it from what I understand. And yeah, it appears to be very safe. Like it reduces cardiovascular risk. It reduces diabetes risk. There are studies suggesting it reduces all-cause mortality a little bit.
Wow.
Yeah, so and it's part of a class of drugs that's been around that's been in use in humans for like 16 years now. So there's actually a lot of data on this class of drugs. It's not like super new in terms of the class. In the US, it's been approved for diabetes since 2017. So there's 4 years of data at lower doses. They're using higher doses for obesity. But, one of the things I wrote about in this article is that this is just a leading edge of a new wave of obesity therapies that are coming out of the research and medical communities. And I think it's really going to change obesity treatment a lot. I think it's really exciting and it's really going to change things. So for people who, like I fully support diet and lifestyle. That's what I've spent most of my time thinking about and writing about. And but for people who, have full-blown obesity and are really struggling and have tried a lot of things, don't hesitate to go see a doctor and see what else you can do. And I think these drugs are something to consider. And I think that we can all be hopeful that this new wave of therapies will really make a big difference. In the United States, I know it's not quite as high in Canada, but in the United States, 43% of adults have obesity.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like when we use the word epidemic, it's really an epidemic. Like, and there's people try diets, 2/3 of people with obesity try a diet every year, and they've tried a lot of different things. Most people have tried a lot of different diets. And so, I think we need to have more tools on the table. And I think that's what we're getting. And I'm excited about that.
Yeah, no, that sounds very promising. 18% per year with very minor side effects. That's
So sorry, not per year, just 18 to
sorry,
20%
my bad.
total.
Yes.
Yeah. So they
In and
would
of itself,
stabilize.
yes.
Yeah. So
And for this,
at like 60, 70 weeks, they would stabilize around 18 to 20% lower. Yeah.
that's very impressive. And considering the side effect profile, that's very promising, really promising. Amazing. Thank you for sharing. And I'm sure a lot of you, the viewers, will now go ask their doctors for this. Um, so where can people find the Hungry Brain? Obviously, there's Amazon.
Yeah. So first of all, I just wanted to add one little thing to what I just said.
Yes.
I just want to clarify to everyone that I have no conflicts of interest with the pharmaceutical industry. So I'm not like trying to promote this because I make money or have any kind of connections or anything like that. I just have looked into the research and spoken with people, and I just think it's an interesting drug. So yeah, just wanted to clarify that.
Sure.
The Hungry Brain, you should be able to find on any major bookseller website. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc.
Also in Canada, we have Chapters Indigo. So I've seen it there as well.
Okay.
Awesome. And where can people find out more about your anything else you're writing about, like the drugs or anything else?
Yeah, so that article is going to be appearing in a publication called Works in Progress, which is all about how the world is changing, and that I'm not sure exactly when it's going to appear. I can't remember, but it will be fairly soon. I'm most active on Twitter. I occasionally write on my website, which is stephanguyenet.com.
Yep.
Or if that's
And
too hard,
just for the listeners, StephanGuyenet.com.
that's right. And if that's too hard to remember or spell, you can go to wholehealthsource.org, and that'll take you to the same place.
Perfect. So either StephanGuyenet.com or wholehealthsource.org. Perfect. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. It's fantastic information. And I'm looking forward to sharing this.
Okay, thanks, Igor.
Thanks so much, Stephan.